Hi, and welcome to our exclusive interview with George B. Thomas. George,
Call will
thanks for
be
being here
recorded.
today.
How are you doing today?
Good, good. I wanted to say that we're sponsored by Healthy Brands. We help grow through coaching, and we help agency owners buy and sell their businesses. So that's my jam. That's the audience we run around with as agency owners, and I know you're no stranger to that world, right?
Yeah, I about 12 to maybe even 15 years now, which man, I hate talking, Ryan, conversations that say years because they get bigger, which means I'm getting older. But yeah, probably about 15 years of agency life, 10 years of inbound agency life or helping people with HubSpot.
Yeah. So I think I want to introduce you today from my past with you. And I don't have you and I personally haven't like spent a huge amount of time together, but we've always been in the same circles. And I had a HubSpot agency, opened that up in 2008. And we got into, inbound. We started going to the inbound conferences, and through a bunch of my friends that were agency owners, I met you, and we hung out at Agency Partner Day there at HubSpot. I had a photo I posted. I looked a lot younger then. I didn't have a beard. Speaking of ages, but right away I noticed your personal brand. It stuck out at me before we even got this far. Like you were attracting people around you by your personality, and this isn't don't let your head explode on this part here, George, but you just had that personality, and everybody was warmed up to you. And so as things progressed, you worked for the sales line, Impact, and you worked at Impulse Creative with my good friend Remington, and I just loved watching your journey. And so I'm excited today to have you talk about that journey today and your personal brand. So
Yeah, it's interesting, and it has been one heck of a journey. And first of all, thank you for the compliment, because a lot of what I'm going to say today, and hopefully people are going to grab onto and run with, is a lot of what we'll talk about is based off of one fact, and that is just being a good human. Like the ability to be a good human. And when I say that, what I mean is kind of empathy and caring and passion, and this mindset of 1% better each and every day, meaning educating yourself on the things that enable you to help others. Because there's just something that happens when you are this. And by the way, my videos always end with be a happy, helpful, humble human. Right. And so when you are that kind of person, what we'll talk about kind of plays out. So the other piece of this, Ryan, that I think everybody needs to understand is that I didn't necessarily sit down and strategically plan out every step of the brand building around George B. Thomas. But there are some smart things I did, and there are some things that just kind of happen naturally because of a thing that I want to talk about before we get done here, and that is turning yourself into a transition specialist. So put a note down that we need to talk about transition specialists before we get out of here. But the journey is, I was working at a small agency in Massillon, Ohio. One day, it was a normal day like any other day, and our social media guy came running in, and he's like, hey, there's this thing called the world's largest webinar by a company called HubSpot. We should attend it. And the owner of the agency and I looked at each other and we're like, what? With who? And so to make a long story short, we watched this world's largest webinar. It was Mark Killens and some of the HubSpot Academy team. They were going to give away 10 tickets to the 5% of top tweeters. Our social media guys' fingers are on fire. Zach and I were sitting there with our feet propped up on the table, just watching and taking it all in. Long story short, we win 2 tickets. Zach and I go to Inbound 2012. I see Gary Vaynerchuk talk about a personal brand. I see him speak for the first time.
he knows a few things about this.
He knows a few things about this. And I learned about HubSpot. I learned about Inbound, and HubSpot was talking about something that really impacted me deeply. And again, this goes into being passionate about what you're going to kind of circle your personal brand around. HubSpot at that point was talking about, don't call me a customer, call me a human. And I lean into the human side of things. I always have, like, whether it was working at a bar or working at a church, like there's just this human element. And I pay attention to the human over HubSpot, by the way, as I've kind of moved forward. And so we win tickets, we go, all of that happens. I come back, we get HubSpot for this small agency. I get 1 certification, 1 becomes 3, 3 becomes 6, 6 becomes 12. I think I sit today with like 38 HubSpot certifications, accredited to HubSpot. Did 2 years before I left to start my own business of HubSpot onboardings for HubSpot themselves. So, just understanding, like, I'm passionate about this tool, sure. But what I'm really passionate about is the success and journey that I can enable people to be on by leveraging this tool for bigger things like marketing, sales, service, websites, stuff like that. And so this whole journey, again, not strategically planned out, started in a small agency, but because of this education that I was getting, all of a sudden I got a call from Marcus Sheridan. And at that point, it was the sales line. And he's like, hey, I've heard some things about you. Wait, what? I live in Massillon, Ohio. How have you heard anything about me? I've heard some cool things about you. I think you have some talents that we could use at the sales line. And so I literally hung up the phone after talking to him. By the way, he said this to me, which I think begs to be said. He said, hey, I don't want you to make a decision right now. I want you to talk to your wife, because it's important that you and your wife are aligned. And I was like, what boss ever does that? So I get off the phone and I say, hey, I'll call you next week. And I get off the phone and I have this big smile. And my wife's like, what was that about? I go, well, I think I just won the marketing lottery, to be honest with you. Like, he wants to offer me a job. And she goes, well, then why don't you take it? So I literally called back 10 minutes. I said a week. I called him back in 10 minutes. I said, I talked to my wife. I'm good to go. Let's do this. And so for 5 years.
Wait, did you know who he was when he called you up? Did you?
Oh, yeah, I knew who he was. I knew who he was. I was like, oh my God. So for 5 years, I got the opportunity to work side by side with an amazing communicator, amazing professional speaker, somebody who had been in the trenches and had a great success story of using HubSpot and content to actually become who they became. And here's where it got interesting, because Marcus was able to help me get past some of my, what I thought were biggest hurdles, but ended up being my biggest strengths. Meaning we were about a year, maybe 8 months into the sales line journey. And he says to me, hey, we should create a podcast specific for HubSpot users. And my response to that, Ryan, was, you must be out of your mind, because I hated my voice. In my head, my voice sounds squeaky. It sounds like, it's just, my voice annoys me. Okay. Here is the thing. I was like, you're out of your mind, but we did it. We started a podcast, and we get to the next inbound. It's like inbound 2014, I think, at that point. And all of a sudden I get people coming up and they're like, oh, dude, you sound like a radio announcer. And I'm like, wait, what? Are y'all crazy? What? And so the fun part about this is, again, I thought it was a, weakness. It ends up being a strength. So he says to me, hey, I think you should start creating HubSpot tutorials. I think, content around HubSpot would be great. I'm like, you're out of your mind, man. I've historically been behind the camera. I really haven't been in front of the camera. I'm overweight. I got a voice for radio, as people are telling me now, which I didn't even believe like 6 months ago. It's like, no, I think you should do this. So again, another limiting belief, right? So I start creating, by the way, there's a point to this. I start creating HubSpot tutorials. Today, I've probably created maybe about 2,000 HubSpot how-to tutorials since 2013.
Wow.
Right. And so, but I got really comfortable with being on camera, got really comfortable with HubSpot. And as I would learn something new, I would teach something new. So a couple of things that I want to unpack here. When you're on a journey with your personal brand and building a brand that is uber powerful, once you get to a point, is that you're not let limiting beliefs stop you. 2, you're getting really good at creating content that helps people because it positions you as a thought leader. And this content is what also builds the trust and reciprocity that now I live in a world when people think about HubSpot education, or needing help in HubSpot, and again, others people's words, not mine. Oh, George B. Thomas, he's the OG. Right? There's literally a LinkedIn post that went out today that said, number 9, George B. Thomas. He's the first person I ever saw create HubSpot content. So first mover advantage, get rid of limiting beliefs, create content that position you as the thought leader or the helper, the servant to a community. And that the other piece is listen, the whole story, if you're paying attention, it's super niche or niche, whichever way you want to say it. But it's like, I wasn't trying to serve the entire world. I was just trying to serve HubSpot users. I'll pause there, Ryan. Where's your brain go?
So I got 1,000 things in my head, and I don't want to just ramble. I want you to do the speaking today. But here's what I wrote down before we got on today. I met you. I've talked to you quite a few times, just back and forth on chat, LinkedIn, and the things that resonate with me. I wrote adjectives down, just like we do as marketers when we go to do branding, right? And we come up with these subset of adjectives. And so I wrote them down. And first thing I wrote was HubSpot. So whether you designed it or not, it's your association, HubSpot, okay? And the next would be content, content creation, right? Content. The next word is smart. And so what's interesting is the words that follow smart, which are giving, which that helper thing, fun and friendly. Fun and friendly and smart, oftentimes when we think about people, they don't often go together. Like we judge people or one or the other, and we don't give credit that you can be both. And I real quickly learned that about you, and that's why I think I leaned in and really started paying attention to you and your personal brand, because I was fascinated by these traits that you carry. It's a superpower, I think, to have those. And then the question I had was, you kind of leaned this, said this at the beginning. You said you didn't really intend for it, but is that truly your personality, or are you just faking it?
No. So that's the thing. That's the thing right there. And right? I love that that's the question. So let me unpack it in this way. I'm a firm believer that life gives you the opportunity to learn lessons. And if you learn those lessons and take them and move forward, it's going to turn you into somebody very spectacular. So when I first started getting started with creating content, I was reaching out, Ryan, to people to see if they would do interviews. I literally had one person who thought they were emailing their coworker back, but emailed me back and said, "Who the hell does this guy think he is?" And that was a life lesson for me. That was a life lesson to never be that person. And I literally have a rule. Like, there's new website copy being created for my website right now as we speak. And it's like, I have one rule out of everything in life: no douchebags allowed. And so because I put that in my brain, I'm not allowed to be that way, right? And the opposite of douchebaggery is that happy, helpful, humble human. So one, somebody taught me that lesson. I'm going to move forward in this way. Down to, like, I think intimately about if somebody came and sat at my, fire pit in my backyard, saw me on stage, or watches a video, the thing that I want them to go away with is, wow, George B. Thomas is always just George B. Thomas. Like, there's no fluff, there's no BS. It's just, you're going to get what you're going to get. And fundamentally, that is just how I'm made. Sometimes it's a positive. Sometimes it's a little bit of a negative, because I'm willing to say the things that others might not say, because I'm always over indexing on the greater good of the other human that I'm talking to. Right. And so, no, I'm not faking it. As a matter of fact, if I was faking it, it would crush my soul. And so, again, if we take some lessons away from that, if you're going to build a personal brand that's going to crush it, that's going to take you places, you have to understand who you are, what you're about. And when I say that, I'm literally talking about, what are your values? What are the words, going back to what you did, that you want people to say at the end of the day, who you are? And so one of the things you mentioned was smart, and you mentioned friendly and fun. One key thing that you can do when you have this content mindset is, don't try to sound smart. Here's how I know you're a genius. You are really good at simplifying the complex. Because if you can simplify the complex for the mere mortal human being, now all of a sudden people will, man, that dude is smart. But you didn't go about it trying to sound smart. You just made it so that they could understand it. Now you're smart. The other thing, when I go to create any of the content since I started in 2013, is I didn't just want to create educational content. I wanted to create edutainment. I wanted to educate you, but entertain you, because I knew that most content, educational content out there was a little bit boring. And you had to be a certain special breed to push through 2, 4, 6, 8 hours on lynda.com or HubSpot Academy or wherever it might be. You had to be a special type of person. Well, I wanted this to be where somebody watched a video and they're laughing and they're learning, and then they walk away. By the way, this is a key piece. How did I make them feel? How do they feel when this tutorial is over? Well, man, that was fun, and I got to fix my problem. This is amazing.
Yeah. You said something earlier about like being authentic and, being you and how important that is. And then you talked about write down what you want to project, what you want to be, how you want people to perceive you, is the way you said it. And I think the way that you want to be is sometimes very difficult for some people. I think the way that they want to be and the way that they think they should be perceived and who they are, it can be a conflict. And I say this, I've had that experience in doing some personal branding with a CEO that I worked with. And he wanted to be seen as blank, but he was really on the opposite side of this friendly side. He was really aggressive and bold, and it was confrontational to a lot of people. And I was like, we've got to figure out this challenge, right? So for everybody listening to this, like, I understand this might come up, and I've seen it multiple times, actually, not just in this one case, where you might have to do some soul searching and do some life changes to be the person you want to be before you start telling people you're that, because that's not authentic.
Well, first of all, I said I listed those things out. I didn't say that I told anybody that I listed those things out. Right. And I agree with you, Ryan. There has been the part that I never really talk about, and the part that nobody really sees, is it's been 10 years of me unpacking my ish. Right. I've spent a lot of time on the inspirational, motivational, read this book, tweak this thing internally, because there's a couple things that, first of all, if you're on the polar opposite, it's not impossible. You're just going to have more work to do, right? It's not your natural state, but if you want your natural state to be that, then now at least you have point A and point B. You can steer the ship in the direction that you're trying to go. But like, I did things like Jay Shetty's book, right? The Monk Mindset. I read a book that is Gay Hendricks, The Big Leap, which talks about zone of genius and limiting beliefs, because I knew that even I started kind of in this direction, and this is kind of who I was. I knew I wanted to over index and get deeper into that and be more of that, because that's the George B. Thomas brand that I like. This, yes, this is good. This is where we need to go. And so you have to work on this. But here's the thing, to do that, you have to be willing to be uncomfortable, right? And again, uncomfortable and vulnerability. That's what I want to talk about for a second, because working on your ish, laying out a journey to where you actually want to go versus where you might want to be. For some of us, it's a longer distance. For some of us, it's a shorter difference. But being able to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? The podcast, I was uncomfortable. The video tutorials, I was uncomfortable until I got really comfortable. But here's the thing, vulnerability, being able to be vulnerable. I'll never forget. Because, by the way, you have to love your whole self, and you have to show up as a whole ass human. I'm just going to throw that out there real quick. Somebody needs to hear that today. But I was sitting at Cheesecake Factory with Marcus Sheridan and Tiffany Cavane. And Marcus said, I was getting ready for my first keynote ever, Ryan. And Marcus said to me, he goes, hey, if you want this to be a magical thing, you need to start with this. And I said, bro, I am not starting with that. I'm like, I have been running from that for 25 years. I'm not starting my first keynote with that. He's like, listen, George, you know, I love you. And until you're able to be vulnerable, you will miss out on the magic moments of life. And that line rang through my brain. I mean, to this day, I still think about it. But I was like, oh, God, this is going to be painful. But I stepped on stage. I clicked my clicker of my first keynote ever. And it was a black screen with white text. And it said the words, "I'm a high school dropout." And the crowd laughed. And I let it sit there for a second. And then I vocally said, "No, I'm a high school dropout." And you could hear a pin drop, Ryan. Like it got super quiet. And so I went on to tell the story about how when I was in 9th grade, my math teacher in front of the entire class told me I'd never amount to anything, and how I believed him. And then 6 months later, I was a high school dropout. I had my parents sign me into the Navy. I went through boot camp. I got my GED, and I started living life as this person who started as a high school dropout. And that, for a lot of my life, that was like, man, if I could go back and see my math teacher, I'd punch him in the face. And then for a lot more of my life, it's like, if I could see my math teacher, I'd go back and thank him, because he was the fuel that like continued to burn the fire for me to prove the fact that I can actually become something, the George B. Thomas brand, the George B. Thomas that you see today, over a distance, right? Here's the thing.
Yeah.
Hang on one second. We'll get back to this. So I do this keynote. I start with the fact that I'm a high school dropout. The rest of the keynote is about marketing and sales and content and all the stuff that you would typically think that you'd get. I get to the end, and you know, Ryan, people will shake your hand. They'll give you a hug. Great job, high fives, and all that's going on. And I have this lady who comes up and she says, "Hey, I want you to know your story about your math teacher really impacted me." And I said, "Oh, thanks. I appreciate that." And she goes, she totally understood. I wasn't understanding what she was saying. She goes, No. I don't think you understand. For me, that was my mother. And we sat there for 20, if not 30 minutes, and we talked about forgiveness, and we talked about life, and we talked about moving on. And as she walked away, Ryan, I realized at that point, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. I'm getting goosebumps. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be, exactly what I'm supposed to do. And I want to do this for the rest of my life. How do I make this the most powerful brand to get the message out to the world that I've been given, and say it in the certain way that I can say it, that people are going to be able to receive it?
Yeah. This is a very spiritual message in a lot of ways. And I don't mean spiritual by like, religion, but spiritual in the way that you understand this thing that I've learned to understand. Really only in the last year have I fully grasped this idea that your personal brand, people won't buy into it. They will not accept it ever until you can do the thing that you just talked about, where you can face your biggest challenge and fears and own it and say to the world, this was something that happened to me. This was something I faced. This is who I am to the core. And it's always like you said with the conversation with Marcus, it's that thing that you're usually running from the most, that you have to go. And you might shed some tears and this realization of doing this thing. When you can do that and do that to the camera, to other people, and actually just get it out, your authentic brand can now start to shine. And people will love you. They will love you for what you thought they would hate you for.
Yeah. And I can give you the key that unlocks that, by the way. For you watching, listening, the key that unlocks that ability is understanding you weren't designed for everybody. So if you realize who you were designed for, you'll realize they need your stories. And the people that don't like your stories or the way that you talk or the things that, then they weren't supposed to be part of your tribe anyway. So
That's true.
Dive in and serve the people that you were put on the planet to serve.
Amen. Amen. We got a question that came in here. I thought we'd address this one. How do you know what's too much to reveal? And I can understand that question, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, I don't get on. Well, here, I'll give you a great example. It's not about airing your dirty laundry, right? Think about the power of story. Think about the things that you've been in your life. And there are stories that you should tell, and there's stories that probably serve nobody. And if the story doesn't serve somebody, if there's not a point to it where somebody can take it and be like, oh, I can use this to move forward, doesn't need to be talked about. For instance, if you go on my Facebook or my LinkedIn, and I'm so glad, Ryan, that you used the word spiritual, by the way, during my episode here. If you go to Facebook or LinkedIn, you will rarely see me talk about politics or religion. I don't have a lot. I have a couple stories spiritually, religiously, that sometimes I dive into if the audience is right. But I'm not going to go online and start just 2x4ing people that don't need to be 2x4'd. Like, I need them to have information that helps them move forward, doesn't set them back, right? And so when you think about how much is too much to share, that's a good like levelizer of no, probably not going to serve, might set back. Don't talk about that one. This one, enable, catalyst, action. Let's share that one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. On creating, let's go back to like when somebody's quote creating a personal brand. What advice do you have for them to start when they're starting from scratch? And this can be, I've seen this twice. Like it could be you're doing it for you, for yourself. You can be, again, doing it for somebody else. You can be helping them with their personal brand, either as a CMO or as a consultant.
Yeah. And this one's fun to me because I don't think there's like, you know, like when you bake a cake, there's a recipe, right? It's 2 cups of flour, 1 cup of butter. Like, it's brand is something that is so personalized. And here's what I'll say. Like, and I'm going to get to your answer, by the way. But I hope people realize that brand isn't necessarily a thing you have. Your personal brand is literally your essence. Like, it's every action, it's every interaction, it's every like feeling and motion, and like your personal brand is the essence that you decide to leave out into the world. Now, if I'm helping somebody create that brand, and we've talked about a couple of these, one, I'm going to say, okay, you need to figure out a roadmap. So who do you want to show up to be? 1, 2, who are you showing up for? Right? How are you actually going to serve those people? Now, when I get to that, how are you going to serve? There's a couple of things that are very vitally important to think about, because usually when you ask that question and people are building a personal brand, they're going to think, well, I'm going to sell them this. It's not what I mean. Yes, there can be a piece of where does it end up? What is the product? What is the service? How do you actually make revenue? But I can tell you, if you go back to a lot of the videos I've done and the podcast episodes I've done, I don't necessarily ever talk about a product or service that I offer, or even a company that I worked for. But inherently, people know the products and services that the companies that I worked for provide. So how are you going to serve them? How are you going to have a mentality of there is no secret sauce? I'm going to geek squad you. I'm going to teach you everything you need to know, but you're going to realize I'd rather get help doing it. Right. So that's like literally servanthood. And then the sales or the subtle sale can come after that. So it's the, you know, the who, the what, the why, the how, the service. And then the piece that a lot of people will get hung up on, and it's important, don't get me wrong, is, well, visually, what do I show them? The piece that not a lot of people are talking about is emotionally, intellectually, and textually, how do I show up? So 2 things that I think you should always pay professionals for when you're building a personal brand. 1, voice, tone, and messaging. I literally have a friend who we just got done doing a 60-day intensive, like several hour meetings. Who are you? down to, I have a document right now that has voice, tone, messaging, different levers that I can pull on these like 3 major pillars of who I am as a human, and literally bullet points of who I never show up as and who I show up as. Right. And so it's taking what is known in here just subconsciously and being able to literally see it on paper so that you can pass it off to somebody who might write a blog article, create a page, write a video script, and say, this is who I am. I need this to show up as this. So voice, tone, messaging. And she's awesome, by the way. If you watch this and you want to know who it is, DM me, hit me up on socials. I'll let you know.
Excellent.
The second piece is the visual, right? So I like purple. I'm going to make my website purple. Okay, great. I like orange because it's HubSpot orange. I'm going to have some orange on my website. Great. Is that going to serve you best? Like the logo, is there a reason for it? I just want to have a microphone. Great. I'm glad you're a professional speaker, but maybe not a microphone. Like, so the visual side of this is where I also think lean into professionals. Now, here's the thing. Why am I saying that? Because when I launched the website for the business that I just launched, I did the copy, I did the design, I did the development, and it was enough to get it out to the world for a start. But I knew it wasn't the best that it could be. And so when I went through this voice and tone and messaging, the next thing I did is I turned to an agency that I solely trust. Actually, it's a historical buddy of mine, creative director, won visual awards, but nevertheless, if you want to know who that is, you can DM me or hit me up on socials. I'll let you know that too. But I literally said to him and his partner at the agency, I said, listen, I don't care about color. Like, sure, purple's my favorite and orange is synonymous with HubSpot. And everybody, by the way, thinks that I work for HubSpot for the last 10 years, even though I don't. So if they can be incorporated, that's great. But what I want you to do is I want you to use the colors, the style that actually help tell the story best. That's it. And so this willing to understand that your brand is not a pillar of granite, but it's a pile of Play-Doh, and you can mold it and shape it into whatever it needs to be to best serve the community or tribe that actually ends up being at your doorstep. That's the mindset if you truly want this, because it's got to be able to be, again, I'm going to bring up pivoting and transitioning, right? Like that's a key part of like being open-minded, being vulnerable, pivoting, transitioning. I'll stop. You can go, Ryan.
Oh, I'm listening to this thing that I've got 1,000 things hit my head again. I'm thinking about all these CEOs that I've seen try to do personal branding, but didn't get the professional help like you recommended. And their personal brand ends up angling towards other CEOs. And it's like, it becomes this game of look how smart I am. And, CEOs, I love you. I've been one, and I know the pains that you go through and all this, but you have to ask other people outside of you. It could be your own people, could be other people outside of your business. But I see that happening versus realizing who you serve. And CEOs are in the position where a lot of people won't tell them how they come off, how they show up. They'll just pat their backs and say, you're doing great no matter what. And that's why I do like hiring outside. Somebody's going to be truly honest to them about, this is the way I see you right now. And they might do some interviewing and ask some people in the company, like, how's he showing up? What's his pluses? What's his minuses? And really start to give you, what's that look like now before we do the work of improving it? Like, what's it look like right now? I like to get that foundation of understanding what is the truths that we're looking at, and what is the do's we have to do from this point forward. Is it working on you? And, is it changing this idea and this audience that you're focused on? And I'll finish this up with something I'm interested in your opinion on, which is this idea that people tell me, with what I do, I don't need a personal brand because I am not a social media I'm not out there on social media. I hear this. I have answers for it, but how do you, have you heard this before? I mean,
yeah, that's like saying I don't need to breathe. Like,
right.
And again, if you go to this fact that, a brand isn't something that you have, but it is who you are. And by the way, this is personal or company, because company, you just translate it to the humans that are actually in the wall is the actual brand that the company is. Anyway, So it's like saying that you don't need oxygen. And honestly, it leans into something that I want to make sure we hit upon is it shows a blatant lack, and I mean those don't no disrespect, a blatant lack of self-awareness to yourself and to those around you. If you're making that kind of statement, because your brand has nothing to do with social media. By the way, you step out in the hallways of your company, they're seeing your personal brand. You step out into the, aisleways of Walmart, they're seeing your personal brand. Anybody that you interact with is seeing your brand, right? Who you are. And the fact that you would not take the opportunity to actually lean in and build it to be the best that it can be, whether it be online, offline, whatever, is just mind blowing to me, because it is that important. It is that important that you have it in place. But being self-aware, and to the point where, like, it's funny, you mentioned a couple times in this interview of like, yeah, they just don't know how they're impacting people around them, or like, they're on the polar opposite of like where they want to go. I can't tell you the amount of emails or texts that I send out where I'll literally circle back around and be like, did I just sound like an a-hole? Because if I did, that's not literally how I meant it to come across. This is what I meant. Now, 90% of the time, I'll get a response of, I know you well enough. I knew that's not what you meant. But it's still being aware of like the words that are coming out of your mouth, or the typing, right, of your keyboard. Like, so many people are just knee-jerk responses. And they're actually, I like to talk about this. So many people live their life, and especially if you're not paying attention to your personal brand and what that personal brand is creating, so many people are in this kind of conveyor belt life. You ever see the I Love Lucy show with the chocolates? They're like throwing them and they're trying to eat them, and like, and so
We weren't
like,
going to age ourselves, George.
yeah. Slowing down to speed up and paying attention to the impact around you, like, that has to almost be a fundamental piece when you're kind of building a brand. And again, I'm just going to unpack a mindset that I have had and try to continue to have, is my whole goal, not to get weird on people, but my whole goal is eventually I just want to see the ripples, right? I want to see the ripples in the pond of life that 2,000 HubSpot how-to videos created, that a bazillion and one meetings with people created, that stepping on stage, across the globe created. Like, eventually I just want to see the ripples. And I'm willing to create a tutorial if one person watches it. By the way, that's the other thing. Like, don't build a brand because you want to go viral. Like, you don't have to go viral to have an exceptional brand. The way that you build an exceptional brand is you show up every day consistently and build one brick at a time. That is exceptional.
Yeah. That's one of the things I was going to ask you, was for people who go through these exercises and they discover who they are, who they want to present as, and then they go, okay, now what? I think what you just said is the advice from that. It's that piece of it, because I think there's a misunderstanding that people have to do podcasts. They have to do interviews like this. Like, they have to write a book. They have to do workshops. And I think LinkedIn, I love LinkedIn, but I think LinkedIn's given everybody that impression that you have to be this thing. And you're the superhero when, going back to the beginning of this interview, you're the superhero when you're authentically you. And that's the part that I'm like, what do you want to do? That's really the question, is, what do you want to do? Don't ask others what you should do necessarily. Think about what you want to do first and really spend some time with that.
Yeah. There have been time, don't force it, right? I hear you say that, and it's literally, don't force it. There have been times where I've gone 2 and 3 months without creating a piece of content because I'm like, I'm not feeling it. Or there's been like a social platform that I've tried to engage on, and I'm just like, I'm not feeling it. I'm not going to force it. Like if something happens and it naturally feels like, yeah, this is the right place or this is the right time, then I do it. The funny thing is, even when I went 2 or 3 months without creating any content, nobody ever said, wow, George B. Thomas quit creating content, because there was a massive amount of content that was already out there. And every time they were searching for something with the word HubSpot in it, they were finding me. They didn't realize it was yesterday, today, last, whatever. It's still out there. And the one thing I will say about, you don't have to do these things, but when I hear you say those things, Ryan, I envision those as the accelerant to how fast you want to get, not build. There's the building of your brand. That's what we've talked about mostly. But the podcast, the content, the things that you listed off is the accelerant to where you might or might not want to take the brand. That's the movement of the brand. Sure, it's going to help create it because it's the visual points, but it's also what moves it.
Yeah, well said. I want to have some time at the end of this for some questions. And I want to finish with this one thing, because this has been great information, and I hope others have gotten some takeaways from this. I certainly have. And I want to go back to something I learned about you just recently. We were in a conversation on LinkedIn. We were commenting on somebody else's post, I believe, and we learned this about each other. I made a comment about starting over or something, sleeping on a mattress on a floor, in a house that I was basically needed remodeled. It was this was after a divorce I had, and I was young and I had nothing, and I was making this comment. And you fired back with something that about your childhood. And I think this wraps into personal branding so well. It's like your core of who you are. And I've got that thing built into me, like nothing's going to keep me down thing, because I've been able to come back from stuff like that. Right. And if you would, can you tell me and the listeners a little bit about that background? You talked about growing up.
We're talking about the log cabin, right?
Yeah.
People always get a kick out of this. And my wife is like, I don't even know how I married a man that can say these things together. So when I was 3 years old, my stepdad and my mom moved from Ohio to Montana. He was a logger for a logging company, and we lived in a 1-room log cabin with no running water, and we would bathe in the creek next to the cabin because it was like water runoff. So we're talking salt of the earth. When I started school, I would actually ride a pony to a 1-room schoolhouse where there was like 12 of us that were being taught, right? So we're like Little House on the Prairie stuff. And then you go to where I'm at right now, and it's like this HubSpot marketing, sales educator, but that was the beginning, right? And I can continue to go on, Ryan, because I've been enabled to have this amazing story of 1-room log cabin, riding a pony to school, down to almost dying 3 times, to living a life where once I was on food stamps, once I was homeless. I'm a high school dropout. I'm not going to live the life that the universe is trying to give me. How can I actually build the life that I want to have? And finding out that education was the key. The more you learn, the more you earn. Rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. Don't be a douchebag. Be a good human. Actually put out into the world. You will reap what you sow. Like all of these things to become what I feel like is the happy ending of the story is, as of June 1st, starting my own HubSpot consulting company, and it being like, holy crap. Because one last piece I will say is, if you're building a personal brand inside of a company, it is super hard to measure. But when that personal brand, if ever, gets the opportunity to step out of that company, it is night and day.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I love that. You went from like no technology or anything modern to this guy who's super tech modern. It's like a complete renaissance. I love that. Could you go back to doing that?
It's funny. I've actually talked to my wife about maybe someday we move back to Montana, and she just gives me the side eye, like, you crazy boy. But it's funny, you're right. It's like literally no technology. And today we're sitting here, right? It's 2 cameras, a teleprompter, 2 monitors, an iPad, a microphone, like all of this stuff to be able to actually get that message of, and by the way, let's capsulate what just happened. Know who you are, know where you came from, and know where you want to go. That's it.
I got a question that came in. Marilyn says, I create brands for other people and companies, but when it comes to my own brand, I hesitate. Any advice for marketers on creating our own personal brands?
I mean, how real can I be right now? So there's a couple things that hit my brain. First of all, it's like the cobbler's kids, right? And Marilyn, I don't know why, but this is where my brain's going, so I'm just going to go there. But one of the things that I did for a lot of my life is that I put roadblocks in front of my success because I was afraid of what would happen on the other side of success. It was a scary, kind of dangerous place. And so I had these limiting beliefs of, nobody wants to hear from me. The content's not good enough. I did this dirt back in the day, and if it ever came out. So I just would put these hurdles in front of me. And so my question that I would ask you is the fact that you're working on everybody else's brand simply an excuse because of limiting beliefs that we haven't unpacked to allow you to move forward in what happens when you actually do build that brand? I don't know, but it's something that I would be looking at if it was me, right? And then it's just this. As humans, we do what is important. If your personal brand becomes important and you find out or are able to get past the limiting beliefs and the hurdles that might be in your way, you'll be working on that junk till midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. You'll gladly wake up 2 hours early to work on it before client work because it's important, right? Last night I got my off. By the way, I am not a big believer in the hustle culture. I think it's healthy hustle. But yesterday I started work at 7:30 and I got done at 10:15 at night, but I enjoyed my entire flipping day. Because again, one thing I do is I go to play. I don't go to work. Anyway, that's a whole nother podcast episode. But I got done at 10:15. I was in bed by 10:30. I was asleep by 10:32. Let's be honest. But it was because I was making time for those things that were important. And yes, there was lunch with family and there was a couple episodes of whatever here and there, right? But again, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, it's a lot less when you're doing personal brand and the things that excite you and the passion points that you want to go in. It's a lot less about anything of like work-life balance. It's just like life balance. It's all life.
Georgia, I'm going to wrap up for the day. If you want to hang on and you have questions specifically, like I'm going to break out and all of us can have conversations. But I want to end on anything you want to finish with. Like you just started a company. You mentioned that. If you want to give a shout out for that and, what somebody can do if they want to get in touch with you.
Yeah, it's easy. I mean, first of all, company or no company, personal or professional. If you want to hit me up, it's george@georgebthomas.com. It's that simple. Start a conversation. If you're looking at stuff like I use HubSpot and I could use some help, then go to georgebthomas.com. If not, and you want to see all the other ramblings and shenanigans and things that I think about throughout the day, then you can just look up George B. Thomas on any of the socials. Facebook, it's Mr. George B. Thomas. Twitter, George B. Thomas. LinkedIn, George B. Thomas. And just meet me there. And again, I like the DMs. I like the private conversations. I like helping, be that catalyst for getting people to that 1% better each and every day. So don't ever think that I'm too busy. Don't ever think that you're bothering me. Just reach out, ask a question, start a conversation, because that's what I'm here for.
Awesome. Appreciate you being on today and giving us advice on your personal branding. Loved hearing about your journey. And I hope to have you on again. That was fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.